So thank you very much, Gary, for the introduction. Yes, as Gary mentioned, my name's Gavin Allwright. I'm the Secretary General of the International Windship Association, and I'd like to formally welcome you to the Decade of Wind Propulsion. This was an announcement that we made earlier this year, and really, rather than this being a marketing issue, this is really a call to action around delivering on the potential of wind propulsion to decarbonize shipping. So very briefly, I'll introduce the International Windship Association itself, and then I'll move on to talking about how wind propulsion, or what benefits wind propulsion give, and then how that fits into the decarbonization framework, and then on to a number of where the market is today, where it's going, and then a few case studies, just brief ones, looking at three different segments. So the International Windship Association itself has now over 150 active members, and that's grown since 2014 when we established, with 5 pioneering members that founded the association. Our main activities are, like any other trade association, around network development, promotion of wind propulsion, of course, helping to incubate projects, education, and the facilitation side of things with standards, policy, and decarbonization plans. And we're also developing hubs around the world. There are actually 5 in development at the moment, with quite a strong one in Europe Atlantic, and activities in other areas as well. So what are we talking about when we're talking about wind propulsion on ships? Well, we're talking about the direct application of wind power. So that's using wind energy. Of course, we can use that to develop and generate alternative fuels, which will be vital for the full decarbonization of shipping. But when we're talking about wind propulsion, we're talking about the direct delivery of 100% zero emissions, renewable, abundant energy source to the vessel to move that vessel, as we have done for thousands of years, but now using up-to-date modern automated technologies. So as a retrofit option, that's a 5 to 20% propulsive energy can be delivered from wind propulsion systems, with the potential to optimize that up to 30% with technology developments. But also, if we start operating vessels as a wind vessel more than a motor vessel. So this 5 to 20% is on a motor vessel operational profile. But if we start routing for wind, or we adjust our speed so we can increase the percentage delivered from wind, then we can get improvements there. And if we're going to the new build and we want to be optimizing that as a primary wind vessel, then 50% plus is absolutely doable, but again, including those operational changes where we're actually routing for wind, etc. And I'll talk about those a little bit later. But what we're talking about here is a free energy source, once the technology has been paid for, delivered to the point of use with no need for new infrastructure. It's deliverable today. You don't need to store it on board. And it also will help with the facilitation of those alternative fuels, reducing the amount there. And some of our members are already offering leasing options, where you're actually moving the cost of the technologies from a heavy capex into an opex option. And just finally on this slide, there are actually 7 technology groups. Now, I'm not going to go through those all today. You'll hear a few of these mentioned, but these are kites, rigid or hard sails that we see coming out of situation or industry, rotors, which we will hear a lot about from Yuka after me, who's going to be talking from Norsepower, soft or traditional sail systems, which I think everybody's familiar with, but upgraded to 21st century systems and 21st century materials, and another system called a suction wing, which actually sucks in the boundary layer around a more stubby wing sail. And then we have a couple of other sections, turbines and hull form. So turbines to generate direct power or direct propulsion, and also electrical generation. And then hull form, where the hull of the vessel is actually modified to become a large wind sail. Now, how does this fit into the decarbonisation pathways? Well, if we're bringing wind propulsion into the core of decarbonisation, across the fleet, we could expect maybe a conservative, say, 20% delivery from new vessels and also those retrofit vessels. And pretty much there are systems for all vessels. If we tie that in with activity or operational optimization, so the A of wave, with another 20%, voyage and fleet management, weather routing, as I mentioned before, speed reduction, doesn't just save fuel, but it actually increases the percentage that wind can deliver. Then we go on to the V of the hybrid wave, which is the vessel optimization through design, energy management system, energy efficiency measures like air lubrication, EPL, that type of thing. Those combined at a conservative level is around 60%, possibly higher. That really reduces the burden that we have to develop eco fuels. So actually possibly bringing those in earlier into the market, less storage space on board, less bunkering required, etc. So where are we today? Well, with large vessel installations, we've actually got 17 ocean-going vessels installed as of last week, where a kite system was installed on a Louis Dreyfus amateur ro-ro vessel. And that will be going out for obviously sea trials and then on to commercial use over the coming weeks and months. As you'll notice, there are tankers, bulkers here, ro-ro, ferry crews, general cargo, and fishing vessels. Now, the one segment that isn't included here at the moment are container ships. And of course, one of the restrictions of wind propulsion for some systems is having the deck space, especially for retrofit. Kites are certainly one of the options, being an off-deck system that can be an option for retrofitting on container vessels. But of course, in new build container vessels, then the trade-off between giving up a few percent of deck space for a system that could potentially deliver, say, 10 to 20% of the propulsive energy on a system, that is an interesting economic decision to be made, especially with new fuels coming in at a high cost. What are the market forecasts and the pipeline status going forward? Well, probably by Q1 2023, with COVID issues and supply chain issues at the moment, we'll be looking at doubling the amount. So I would say at the end of Q1 next year, we will have 20 vessels in operation. We will certainly double that by probably Q1 2023. As part of that, there are 4 to 5 likely tanker installations in the pipeline. Those will be over, probably leaking into 2023, but by the end of 2023 for sure. And just a couple of points here. What we generally take are third-party market forecasts rather than optimistic forecasts from IWSA. One of those was made back in 2016-17 from CE Delft research team commissioned by the EU. And they saw that up to 2030, there would be up to 10,700 installed systems, mainly on bulkers and tankers, because speed issues and also the availability of deck space. This was prior to the IMO initial strategy in 2018 and subsequent development. However, we see the top end of that estimate as being a realistic one, but requires quite a lot of manufacturing and installation ramp up. For the 2050s, UK Clean Maritime Plan, which was released in July 2019, The research around that looked at around about 40,000 vessels, or getting up towards 50% of the global fleet would have wind propulsion installations. We think by that period, actually, that's a conservative number. However, we'll take that from the third party, and that's still significant market there. Now, this is a rather busy slide, and I'm not going to be delivering all the information on this slide. But these are just some of the tanker and bulker developments, and actually there are a number of others that could have gone into here. But I just wanted to show you a quick snapshot of some of the developments here. Now, these are not all installations. We only have a few installations so far, but this indicates the pipeline that we're talking about. And I'll just pick out a few of these. MOL up in the top corner, they are working very seriously in wind propulsion. They will have 2 bulker new build vessels coming out in 2022. And of course, they have a very large fleet that they're looking at. Once those are validated, probably in 2023, they'll be looking to roll that out across more of their fleet. Another very recent installation announcement was from Shell, where they're looking at 2 CO2 carriers with wind assist on them to be delivered in mid-2024. Down in the bottom left corner, the VLCCs, there is one in operation already by China Merchants Energy Shipping. The second one is on order with 4 wing sails, which are retractable. The current one is has 2 smaller versions of that. Swinging over to the right-hand side, we have a new build. Actually, it's a ro-ro vessel using ocean wings called the Canopy, which has been ordered by Ariane Group. They also have an AIP tanker ready design, and they're ramping up production of those retrofit and new build installation wind propulsion systems. Coming down to K-Line, actually this is the first installation has gone on the Louis Dreyfus amateur ro-ro vessel as of last week. K-Lines will be testing those as well in 2022, and they have a contract option for 50 installations across their fleet if that is validated and successful. And just a final one in the bottom right corner is a very big player in shipping, of course, Cargill. Chartering up to 600 vessels, I think, at any one time, and they are involved with one of our members, Bar Technologies, Yara Technologies, to install a wing sail system on one of their bulkers. I think so. It's a product tanker, and they're looking at, again, once that's validated, to roll that across their fleet. Now, on the smaller vessel, sort of short sea wind assist system, we have a project underway in the North Sea region of Europe, which is actually funded by Interreg North Sea Europe. And this project is installing, or has installed, 5 wind propulsion systems on board 5 different vessels. And the idea is to validate those, third-party performance validation, the engineering, capturing all the best practices around this. And the expected savings are probably around 10%. Many of these systems are fairly small systems being retrofitted onto existing vessels. So up to a 10% performance is quite good. And obviously there's potential to optimize those further in the future. But these 5 vessels include mini bulkers, general cargo, and 4 of them are. And the 5th one actually is one from Norse Power, the technology. So I'll let Yuka talk about that, which is installed on a ferry, large ferry with scanlines. But this performance valuation and the business case evaluation is really critical to scaling this size of wind propulsion. On vessels, I think mainly between 3 and 5,000 deadweight tons. So, very key for the short sea shipping segment. Now, I'm just going to take you into the future a little bit, and this is one of my last 3 slides, into primary wind projects. Now, of course, this takes the use of wind to a very optimized level. And as you can see, there's some quite key players that are developing primary wind projects. We have Neoline, which is already secured cargo partners from Michelin, Hennessy, Group Renault, and they will be hopefully pulling the trigger on the build of at least 1 ro-ro. They want to be operating 2 on a North Atlantic route, and they're talking about up to 80% wind power on that route, sailing around 11 knots. Silent Seas, Chantier d'Atlantique, actually, this is already a design-ready project. So if you've got the money to do this, you want to build an expedition cruise vessel, you can go to Chantier d'Atlantique, and the designs are already there, and you can trigger a bill. The wing sail system is, they're just doing the testing on that. On land, they have a 38-meter test rig that they're working on now. That will be extended to a 100-meter rig later next year. Very interesting, around 70% of wind power with a maximum speed up to 17 knots. Oceanbird has been getting a lot of news recently, because the joint venture has just been signed between Wallenius Marine and Alfa Laval to deliver this design, a 7,000 car capacity car carrier with 4 or 5 rigid sails which are retractable. And Wallenius Wilhelmsen is assessing the build of this and looking to actually build one of these for operation in 2025. Initial that route of 90% wind power at 10 knots is lower than standard speed, which would be around about 14 plus knots. So a couple of days extra on the transit time, but saving a huge amount of fuel on that period as well. And finally, MOL again, which I mentioned before, using the Wind Challenger sails that they're going to be retrofitting onto bulkers. They're looking at a really substantial wind propulsion system that actually generates or captures and harvests excess wind propulsion energy, and turns that into hydrogen fuel on board, mixed with toluene to make it stabilized, to be used when additional fuel is required, but even looking at creating a tanker that could be carbon negative and actually offload that hydrogen fuel when as a cargo as well. So a very interesting project there. Likely to be full size by 2030, but there'll be options to accelerate that as well. Now, this is my final main slide. I just want to put this in perspective. Remembering wind propulsion is a free energy source. The technology is not free, but the energy source is for the lifetime of the vessel. So this is a thought piece around, if we were to roll out wind propulsion substantially across the fleet, 100% across the fleet this decade, delivering 20% saving from the technologies themselves, but also some operation and speed changes. Because it's a free energy source, actually that would release funding over the next 3 decades to be able to deliver the cost of the full decarbonization, of IMO 2050 for sure, and potentially the full decarbonization cost of shipping. So if we are able to integrate this into the decarbonization pathways for shipping, the difficult to abate moniker that is given to shipping starts to dissipate, and actually we may be able to deliver this in a macro sense just from the savings that we get delivered from wind propulsion. And this is a significant wake-up call in policymakers and decarbonization pathway developers. And my last slide. All of these companies that have their logos here are all in some way engaging with wind propulsion. They're either testing systems, There's ship owners who installed. They are class societies who are certifying these, etc., etc. Cargo owners that sign contracts for this. Now, as I mentioned, with 20, coming up to 20 vessels installed, this is not periphery, but it's not mainstream yet. It's not a mainstream technology quite yet. However, as you can see here, the sector is being propelled and the momentum is being driven by very much large players in the industry, so mainstream players in the industry. And I think within 12 months to 18 months, we will be able to change that and say it is a mainstream technology that's being installed on a regular basis. And we like to call that a win-win situation. But thank you very much, and I'm more than happy to answer email questions if we aren't able to get around to your question today. And on that note, I'm going to stop my share and hand over to Jukka, or hand over to Gary to introduce Jukka, perhaps. Okay, or maybe I can introduce Jukka. So, Jukka, because I always get your second name wrong. Sorry, Jukka.
No problem.
Jukka Kuskowski, the CSO of Norse Power, which is one of the leading wind propulsion technology companies that we have out there in the market. So, Jukka, handing over to you.
Thank you very much, Gavin. And again, sharing screen here. Hopefully you will be seeing that first slide now. So good afternoon to everyone. I'm presenting you Norse Power's solution for wind propulsion, which is based on the old invention of Flettner rotor, which we have modernized and applied already for several ship installations, and I'll be describing our experiences in addition to some basic information of this technology, which might not be very familiar to everyone. Norse Power was established in 2012 with the main and only purpose of modernizing an old invention, the Flettner rotor, to make it suitable for modern shipping, commercial ships operating the oceans and also short sea traffic, with the main idea of making it so cost effective and efficient that there is a definite business case supporting investment in this kind of fuel saving, energy efficiency improvement technology. As mentioned, we already have several reference projects in operation, which prove that the system works very well and fulfills its purpose of saving energy with a very easy to use and reliable wind propulsion system. We're still a rather small company. As Gavin also mentioned, wind propulsion is a growing market, but starting from a small market base still. Our turnover in 2020 was 5 million, but we're looking forward to rapid growth as the market is increasing and building awareness and confidence in these systems. We're a Helsinki-based company, but we have also operations in China and also operate manufacturing partners in Poland. This slide is mainly to remind all of us that we're talking of mechanical sails, which produce a thrust force for the ship. It's a rather common misunderstanding when people hear that a rotor sail, which is a spinning cylinder on the ship's deck, they often consider it as a generator generating electrical power for the ship, but actually no, we are using some electrical power for spinning and in return giving a lot of thrust for the ship to move forward with lower propulsion power from the main propeller. Of course, it's the traditional way all cargo moved on the oceans for hundreds and thousands of years. But today, this type of auxiliary propulsion system is reducing fuel consumption on modern cargo ships. Typical saving potential is from 5 to 25%, depending on ship's size and operating profile. But of course, possible to apply in larger configurations where then the share of wind propulsion is increasing. Our vision is that we want to bring sailing back to shipping. How does then the rotor sail, the Flettner rotor, work? Here a short description for everyone to relate to the everyday phenomena of a spinning ball. It might be a football, as in this example, a golf ball, table tennis, whatever you might have experience with. But when this ball travels in air with a spin and meets the wind coming towards the ball, when the spinning ball surface is spinning in the same direction as wind, there will be an increased flow speed on the surface, which means a reducing pressure. On the opposite side of the ball, the surface is traveling against the wind, which means there is a reduced flow speed and increased pressure. This means there is a lift force created at a 90-degree angle from the wind direction. So this is the Magnus Effect, which is happening in ball games. And you can imagine that the long cylindrical rotor surface is like a stretched ball surface. So it's creating a lot of thrust force when we make it spin with the help of an electric drive and when wind conditions are suitable. So wind being the main element for energy, it means that there are differences in where the wind propulsion can benefit ships the most. And that's related to wind conditions in oceans. And this map describes the potential for fuel saving and propulsion power saving on ships on different routes. The blue colors show the highest potential for saving in this example with one 30-meter high rotor sail in excess of 500 kilowatts of average propulsion power equivalent force is created. So we can see North Atlantic regions, North Pacific, the Southern Oceans, they have very high average wind speeds, providing the best saving potential. And then the latitudes closer to the equator, they have lower average wind speeds and therefore provide also lower saving potential. So this is good to keep in mind when there's a fleet of ships operating in different regions, to start with those ships rather which are sailing more in the higher wind speed areas. They provide the best investment case. The reference projects that we have so far, and a few of those I'll highlight a little more, are basically shown here. The first installation in 2014 on this green Ro-Ro ship proved the concept and gave confidence for us to develop larger models. Gavin mentioned Scanline's ferry, which is shown here at the top. So one 30-meter high rotor sail on this ship saves approximately 4 to 5% of the ship's fuel consumption and emissions on average in its operation between Denmark and Germany. There's a bulk carrier, very large ore carrier, which is our most recent delivery for Pan-Ocean owned vessel chartered by Vale. And then this blue ship, originally Maersk Pelican, installed in 2018, which I'll be describing a little more. The first tilting model installation on the sea cargo Ro-Ro ship is this blue ship, And it's also a very interesting ship now with two 35-meter high rotor sails operating in the North Sea with a very good operating experience. So a little more details of how the Maersk Pelican installation with rotor sails was tested and verified for performance. Obviously, it's important to make sure that the performance that the supplier, Norse Power in this case, we promise a certain type of performance, and it's important to verify that. And for this project, Lloyd's Register was selected to make a measurement campaign which lasted for more than a year to verify the fuel saving performance. So after installation, the first 12 months was made as a measurement campaign, and before installation of rotor sails, there was a baseline measurement campaign done to make sure that there is a fair comparison of operation before rotor sails and after rotor sails. The bottom map shows the various routes that the ship was mainly sailing on during the year of operation when these measurements were taken. So you can see it's quite a varied area. So not a single route that could be operated, but the vessel on spot market typically operates on like this. So the project was taken forward and started by the ship being dry docked in China, where the shipside works were completed in early 2018, and the actual rotor sails were installed in Rotterdam during a port call. So less than 2 days for the actual installation of rotor sails. The measurement campaign results are shown in the table on the right side. So during the first year, the results from Lloyd's Register report conclude 8.2% of fuel savings. Obviously, the emissions saved as well, the same, which means about 1,400 tons of CO2 during the first year of operation. And this is very well in line with our prediction before installation of 7 to 10% of savings, which we concluded based on our simulations. That could be the savings potential in global operating conditions. I mentioned already the first tilting project, the Sea Cargo SC Connector sailing in the North Sea. And this vessel shows the potential of large rotor sails in good wind conditions. So the vessel is able to reach approximately 20 knots of speed with only 3 to 4 megawatts of main propeller engine power and 7 megawatts worth of thrust force, which is calculated to be propeller power equivalent of 7 megawatts. And this is obviously in high wind speed conditions where the wind direction is favorable from the beam. And the expected savings average is 25% for this ship operating between Norway, UK, and Europe. This also being our largest installation on the very large ore carrier, consists of 5 medium-sized 24-meter high units, which are tilting. As you see on the photo on the right side, the units are tilting to port to make sure that cargo handling with conveyor and cranes is done without any problems, and the cargo handling equipment can freely move on top of the hatches. This ship is sailing between Brazil and China. The expected savings based on simulations is 8% on an annual level, about 3,400 tons of CO2. Ship has been sailing a few months now, so we don't have yet more figures to present, but certainly performance is being evaluated during the first year of operation. The market potential, we saw a few slides from Gavin's presentation. We've obviously evaluated the same to make sure that business is available for future, which we see that there is a good and very strong demand for. Total of 30,000 ships in the existing global fleet are technically possible, which means that there is deck space available and the operating environment is suitable for rotor sails. And we also expect that the future new building projects will more and more include also rotor sail technology to improve the vessel's energy efficiency, but also the very important indexes for energy efficiency like EEDI, EEXI. And the global potential for saving of emissions is also very significant. If all the 30,000 vessels were fitted with such technology, it would mean more than 80 million tons of CO2 emissions reduced annually. And this is an equivalent of roughly 30 million passenger cars. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to questions and comments you might have.
Okay, thanks very much, Jukka. Really interesting sort of deep dive into technology installations, etc. So got about 20 minutes for questions, and I have a few already come in from various people here. So I'm gonna kick this off with a broad question here, which is what about safety and other like SOLAS considerations, like lines of sight for navigation, etc. How has Norse Power been handling that issue?
Yes, definitely an important part. All of the regulations and rules that are in place are to be considered. So the SOLAS regulations, for example, for visibility from the bridge, is one of the first evaluations we make when considering how many rotor sails, which locations on deck are possible, to make sure that the blind sectors do not exceed the allowed limits. So it's a very basic early evaluation.
Yeah, and I think just to sort of widen that out, I mean, we have 3 associate members in IWSA from class, so Bureau Veritas, ABS, and Class NK, and from my understanding, most of the safety issues, most of the stability issues have been solved or are in the process of being certified and all those considerations locked in. And of course, for some substantial wind propulsion system, if you have your deck house or your wheelhouse in the stern, then there may be some issues around very large systems being put in. An interesting development there is around the use of sensors and the use of cameras that are being developed for autonomous vessels, which could also lead to larger systems for wind propulsion being taken into account. But frankly speaking, no wind propulsion system will ever be installed unless it's fully certified by class. So I've got another question here. Are wind propulsion technologies mature enough now to survive in the market alone? Will government incentives be needed to encourage adoption? All right, I'll kick that one off, and then I'll ask Jukka for his opinions. I think with with the current situation, we're obviously in a maturing situation, but we're in the early stages at the moment. So all of the installations are single installations on vessels. I think once we get to fleet installations and real multiple installations, then costs start to come down. I think every doubling of installations will probably reduce the cost by around 10%, or that's at least what we've seen in the wind turbine sector, we've seen in other maritime technology segments. And also, I mean, it's one of the key issues is around the fuel price. And, you know, at the moment we have LNG, which has an MGO equivalency around about $1,500 per ton. Green methanol that Maersk is bringing in a couple of years will be around $2,000 per ton of fuel. And at those kind of prices, when we have MGO at $650 at the moment, you know, that's a substantial cost, which feeds into making better ROIs for wind propulsion. My final point is, of course, government incentives and subsidies are great to help with those initial stages, but I think quite quickly, wind propulsion stands on its own 2 feet. Your opinion on that, Luca?
Sure. No, everything you said, of course, very true. I'd say that maybe it's also a sort of a mental support for the first pilot installation is to receive some sort of financial support, either very good term credit conditions or just you know, a share of the project funded. But then later on, when the confidence has been built up after the pilot project, I think it will be less needed. And as you mentioned, the environment of costs, fuel prices, and so on will of course have an influence. And we are seeing actually right now that the market starts to also demand such solutions and real actions from shipping companies, because then the market, meaning charterers and consumers, are also looking for what's the supply chain doing to reduce the environmental impact. So there's also a more indirect demand that influences such decisions. But nevertheless, all financial support is of course positive to help get started.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've got actually another question that's come in here, which there's some connection to this as well. It says, were COP26 and the recent MEPC 77 good news for wind power? I could take a crack at that. I was at both of them. But I'd really like to get your opinion on that as well, Jukka. Yes, COP26. Actually the declarations and the announcements that came out of the maritime sector, I thought were quite substantial. The call by, I think it was over 100 companies for zero emission shipping to be adopted, or a zero emissions target to be adopted at IMO, was very significant, and some very, very large players involved there. And there are also things like the First Mover Coalition, looking at purchasing around low emission shipping, etc. Those were quite significant calls to the IMO and calls for action that the industry will take itself. One good example of a non-IMO activity is the green corridors that are being declared in the Clydebank Declaration, which would establish zero emission shipping corridors where fuels would be applicable or available both ends. We're looking at how that will translate for wind propulsion as well. MEPC, the new circular 896 was adopted, and that clarified a lot of the detail around EEDI calculations and therefore EEXI. And there was also an element that was adopted around showing wind propulsion's capability or potential better, because currently the system or previous system didn't take into account a lot. So taking the higher level of the performance and using that for EDI calculation. So that's I think that's a significant move. But we will be reviewing and looking at impact studies going forward. Jukka, your take on what you saw coming out of COP26 and MEPC?
Well, excellent summary, Gavin. Thank you. But the MEPC 77 definitely brought this, as you mentioned, consideration of the better half of wind propulsor performance when calculating the index for EEDI and EEXI. So this will definitely be an important part for ship owners looking for ways to achieve compliance, and wind propulsion will therefore be much more valuable in that sense. And we understand engine power limitation is the basic solution to start with, but there is less need for EPL if wind propulsion can also be applied at the same time, which enables the ship to maintain higher sailing speeds when the market so demands. So I think it's an important step for wind propulsion after MEPC 77.
Yeah, and I think that EPL issue is a really important one. You know, to be compliant for EEXI, it's the sort of go-to approach. But as you say, you know, if you've got wind propulsion onto the vessel, you can actually maintain speed, so you're not losing as much from the EPL system as that. But also, you know, I think CII is probably going to be more impactful. And of course, wind propulsion will keep you compliant right into the next decade. So you can, if you're installing wind propulsion systems and you're getting double-digit savings from that, or double-digit efficiency improvements, that's actually allowing you to go back to your core business, which is moving materials around profitably. So, right. Yeah, one other thing I was just going to mention around the COP26 and MEPC. Now, MEPC failed to increase the ambition of the zero emissions just yet. That will be reviewed, I think, next year. But one thing that's really gone up the policy agenda, if you like, has been the discussions around NBMs and carbon levies. And, you know, when, you know, that issue, if we see, for example, the inclusion in the EU ETS, but if we see a substantial carbon levy coming in, that will obviously have a knock-on effect onto the cost of fuel, which is indirectly going to benefit wind propulsion. But equally, there are a number of calls to actually make that a circular tax and bring it back into the industry to support installations, support ship owners with that capex issue, along with R&D, etc. And I think that would be a very substantial improvement, especially when you have an ETS level of $100 a ton for carbon at the moment, translating to $300 per ton of fuel. So I think that's a significant issue and quite a watershed or a real change I've seen in IMO and among the major players. Okay, I'm just looking. Okay, so we've got one more question here. Actually, we've got time for a few more, so please keep them coming. It's often said that wind propulsion is only suitable for certain routes and trade types. But Jukka's Maersk example in particular seemed like a broad deployment. Is there a misunderstanding of wind propulsion's potential in the market? Jukka.
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's true. The perception is that it's only good for some routes. And definitely wind conditions have a big influence on the potential savings levels. So I'd say that wind propulsion, and in our experience, of course, from rotor sails, you can achieve savings practically in any routes. However, larger or smaller, depending on where they are. What is now we're talking of longer term average performance, because of course every day can be different. On any route, there can be a real good wind day, and then you will be saving a lot. But on average, long term, some routes will be less saving potential than others. That's just how things are with the changing wind statistics on the globe.
Yeah, and I'll follow up on that. I absolutely agree with what you just said, Jukka, of course. What we have to remember is the percentages that we're talking about, especially around retrofit, are based on a motor vessel operational profile. So you're not changing anything that you do. You're simply running your ship with a couple of wind propulsion systems on board. So if you bring in other factors, weather routing and the planning of your voyage around weather, that can lead to substantial benefits as well. And I just mentioned, there's a kind of 4-part development here that's going on in the industry. As Jukka mentioned, there's a wind station on board the vessel. So you're getting real-time data about the wind coming into the vessel. If you link that in with satellite data that we're getting now, which is quite precise forecasting of weather patterns now, you link that as well with weather routing software that you can actually plan a better route, for example, based on wind or based on time, depending on which you want to do. And then an interesting development right now, another technology development, is the use of LiDAR to actually be able to predict, a few kilometers off the bow where that wind is going to be coming, and you can adjust. You can adjust the speed of the rotors, you can adjust the pitch of the wing sail, whatever it may be, to help optimize that. So it's not, if we take wind propulsion simply in its small silo, we don't see the full potential. And I think that is very, very key to understanding how this integrates into the whole decarbonization. Okay, I got one. Oh, here we go. Are there barriers to adoption beyond companies waiting for the outcome of their own trials? So barriers. Do you want to take a crack at that, Jukka, or do you want?
Sure.
Go ahead, Sure.
Yeah, of course, everything new takes time for people to accept and be convinced that it's really doing what the supplier is saying it will. And that's why I already mentioned that we also expect the pilot project with every new customer is a way to go. And then after a few months at least of operation with that first one, then there is confidence in continuing. But that's one of the first barriers, is the new aspect, meaning that most people would rather see a few years of operation and then they would go next. But luckily there are also the pioneers who are ready to take the first ones and show how it works. Then I think regulatory point of view, they are maybe not barriers, but they are creating some additional work. So obviously regulations have been developing on the way, and they are being developed all the time. So anything that's maybe not promoting or enhancing the ability to apply such designs, it takes time for the regulations to be adapted and consider these type of new technologies. And of course, the investment part of it is the business case is not so well supported on all routes. And as we discussed, first, it's best to start with higher wind routes if those are existing in your fleet operations, and then go forward from there.
Yeah, no, I would agree would agree wholeheartedly with those. I mean, that perception issue is a challenge. The industry players that I talk with, they've always stated that they wanted 3 reference points, so they could compare technologies or compare performance. And of course, that's there's a kind of ladder of that 3 reference points. We'd like 3 reference points from rotors on ships. Okay, so the rotor sails are the most installed system so far, with around 10 installations. So we reach that number, and then it's like, well, we'd actually like to see 3 reference points in each of the segments. So we'd like to see 3 bulkers with the systems installed. We'd like to see 3 tankers, and that takes a little bit longer to develop. But I think we're very much, and we had that maturity question earlier on. We're very much in that sort of just pre-takeoff period. So a lot of the groundwork's been laid. We've validated a lot of the savings. Most of the barriers have been removed from a technical point of view, and from a safety and regulatory point of view. Now it's really, as you rightly pointed out, Jukka, it's those first movers saying, actually, we validated this, we'd like to put it on another 20 ships. At that point, that creates a significant snowballing effect. And we're not quite there yet, but there's a lot in the pipeline coming through. So, yeah. One of the other, I'll just very quickly, one of the other barriers around perception is also, we're very fuel-centric in our approach in shipping. And probably my last comment would just be, we need to be taking an energy or a propulsion approach to decarbonization, not solely a fuel approach to it. And once we widen that perspective, a lot of the challenges start to melt away. Jukka, I'll just give you the last 30 seconds of our Q&A. Is there anything you wanted to just finish with?
Well, in conclusion, from my point of view, we have a mature technology which has been proven to in many ships. So we're working with many projects now that are proceeding very well. So we see that the strong growth is now coming. It's been waited for some time, but now we really see it starting to happen. So we're really enthusiastic about the development of this market and doing our best to keep the numbers increasing.
It's good to hear. I think we've got to hand over to Gary because we've run out of time.
We have run out of time, but thank you both for your excellent insights into wind propulsion. I'm always astounded every time I hear a presentation on wind propulsion of just how much efficiency there is there to be gained for next to nothing and really very little in the way of ongoing costs. And I look forward to hosting you again in the future to find that body of evidence growing even further as time goes on, and hopefully more and more systems are installed aboard vessels and everything turns a bit greener. So thank you both for your insights. And it just leaves me to remind you of the Sustainable Ocean Forum sessions taking place tomorrow. Check out the agenda online for details of those. And thanks very much for your time. And thanks again to Gavin and to Jukka.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And assalamu alaikum.